Staff Sergeant Ray Hendricks pulled the chair out from under her before she could sit down, not subtly, not accidentally. He hooked his boot around the chair leg and dragged it away from the briefing table in full view of 16 operators. Then dropped into it himself, leaned back and said loud enough for the room, "Sorry, sweetheart, reserved seating." "Shooters only," the room laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make the sound carry, enough to make it feel like agreement. She stood there for a moment, holding a tablet and a black equipment case, and she did not react. She did not look at Hendricks. She did not look at the men who were laughing. She looked at the empty space where the chair had been, and then she looked at the wall behind the briefing screen, and then she set the equipment case on the floor and stood at the back of the room with her arms at her sides and waited. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Forward Operating Base Harmon sat on a flat stretch of nothing in northern Syria, 40 kilometers south of the Turkish border, surrounded by the kind of terrain that looked empty until it killed you. Low scrubland, shallow wadis that turned into rivers during the November rains, and to the northeast, a series of ridgelines that ran along the border like the spine of something ancient and indifferent. The base itself was small by FOB standards. Concrete barriers, modular housing units, a motor pool, 2 helicopter pads, and a command building that smelled permanently of diesel fuel and burnt coffee. There were no amenities, no recreation room worth the name, no gym beyond a collection of weights someone had welded together from scrap metal. The men stationed at FOB Harmon were not there for comfort. They were there because the border region had become, in the past 18 months, the most operationally active corridor in the theater. Cross-border networks, moving weapons, fighters, and intelligence. High-value targets appearing and disappearing into villages where the population had long since learned that cooperation with anyone, any side, any government was a faster route to a funeral than to safety. Master Sergeant Declan Ferris had been at Harmon for 9 months. He was 41 years old, built narrow and hard, with a particular economy of movement that comes from 2 decades of carrying heavy things long distances through places where extra motion gets you noticed and noticed gets you dead. He had 14 deployments. He had been shot twice, both times in the same leg, which he considered either remarkably bad luck or remarkably good luck, depending on how the leg was feeling that morning. He was the senior enlisted man on the base, and the other operators treated his word as something close to law, not because of his rank, but because his judgment had been tested by situations that most human beings would find incomprehensible, and it had come back correct every time. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Aldrich ran the base. He was 46, deliberate, precise, with the kind of authority that didn't need volume. When Aldrich spoke in a briefing, people wrote things down, not because he told them to, because the information he provided had a track record of being the difference between plans that worked and plans that produced flag-draped coffins. Chief Petty Officer Ethan Marsh was the senior SEAL operator. 38 years old, 11 deployments, a man who had earned every piece of respect he carried through a professional life, defined by consistently doing the hardest thing in the room better than anyone else in the room. Marsh was not cruel. He was not petty, but he had a very specific idea of what belonged in an operational briefing, and when the door opened that Tuesday morning and a woman walked in, 5'6", maybe 130 pounds, wearing civilian clothes and carrying equipment, nobody recognized. Marsh's expression did what it always did when something didn't fit his operational picture. It went flat and cold and professionally skeptical. She had arrived at FOB Harmon 40 minutes earlier. A single vehicle, unmarked, dropping her at the main gate with a bag and the equipment case and nothing else. No escort. No advance notification on the daily personnel log. No manifest entry. Private First Class Cody Lanham, 21 years old, 4 months deployed, had been on gate duty and had watched her climb out of the vehicle with the specific bewilderment of a young soldier encountering something his training had not prepared him for. "Ma'am," he'd said, "I need to see identification and authorization paperwork." She'd handed him a sealed envelope. He'd opened it, looked at the first page, looked at the second, and felt something shift in his understanding of the morning. The classification markings on the documents were higher than anything he'd ever handled, higher than anything he'd known existed at his clearance level. "I need to call this up to command," he'd said. "Colonel Aldrich is expecting the call," she'd said. Her voice was calm, not friendly, not unfriendly, neutral in a way that suggested she had done this before. Lanham had called. Whatever Aldrich said to him took less than a minute, but when Lanham came back, his posture was different. Straighter, more careful. "You're cleared for the command building, ma'am." "Thank you," she'd said, picked up her gear, and walked across the compound. By the time she'd covered 50 meters, 3 separate groups of soldiers had noticed her, and the speculation had already started spreading through the base with the speed and inevitability of all speculation in enclosed spaces where boredom is the dominant condition. Journalist. Definitely a journalist. NGO inspection maybe, CIA. Somebody's girlfriend. The Pentagon sent an auditor, God help us. Hendricks had intercepted her outside the command building. He ran security clearances and logistics and took both seriously in the particular way of men who have made their professional identity out of controlling access to things. He'd looked at the documents, looked at her, and made a decision about what he was seeing in approximately 5 seconds. That decision would cost him significant personal discomfort over the next 72 hours. But he didn't know that yet. What he knew was that the woman standing in front of him didn't look like anyone who belonged on a forward operating base in a combat zone, and Hendricks was a man who trusted his eyes. Which is how she ended up standing at the back of a briefing room, without a chair, while 16 of America's most experienced special operations personnel settled into theirs. Aldrich began the briefing at 0800 exactly. 18 hours ago, he said, clicking to a satellite image on the screen. A joint CIA-NSA intelligence operation confirmed the location of a target we've been tracking for 11 months. He clicked again. A village, small. 30 to 40 structures clustered along a single road in a narrow valley between 2 ridgelines. Jamal Sarhan. The room reacted to that name. Subtle reactions, shifts in posture. The particular tightening that happens in a room full of professionals when the difficulty level of something just increased significantly. Sarhan was responsible for the deaths of 14 American service members across 3 separate attacks over the past 2 years. He was also responsible for something worse, something that lived in classified briefings and closed-door conversations, an intelligence network that had compromised multiple operations and was responsible for an ambush 7 months ago that had killed 6 Marines in a convoy that should have been safe. "He's in this village," Aldrich said. "He will not remain. Our window is estimated at 36 hours. He clicked to the next slide. Topographic data. The valley was narrow. The ridgelines on either side were steep and exposed. The village sat at the bottom like something hiding between 2 walls. "Direct assault is not viable," Aldrich said. "The village has a civilian population of approximately 200. Sarhan operates from a compound in the center of the village. Intelligence indicates he keeps civilian families in the outer structures as a buffer. Any assault that involves breaching the compound risks mass civilian casualties." He paused. "There is one option." He pointed to a position on the eastern ridgeline. From this elevation, there is a single firing lane to the interior courtyard of Sarhan's compound. The lane passes between 2 structures, through a gap approximately 14 inches wide. At a distance of 1,900 meters, the room went quiet. Not the quiet of attention. The quiet of people processing something that doesn't fit inside normal parameters. 1,900 meters, Ferris said, through a 14-inch gap. At altitude, Aldrich said, in a valley that generates crosswinds of unpredictable speed and direction due to the terrain channeling effect. Ferris stared at the screen. He was doing the math. Every experienced shooter in the room was doing the math, and the math was producing an answer that none of them liked. "Sir," Marsh said carefully, "I have operators qualified at 1,300. Ferris is qualified at 15. What you're describing is not a shot that exists in any current operational parameter." "I know," Aldrich said. "That's why we requested a specific asset." He looked toward the back of the room. Every head turned. She was standing where she'd been standing since Hendricks took her chair. She hadn't moved. She hadn't shifted her weight or crossed her arms or done any of the things people do when they're standing in a room full of people who haven't acknowledged them. She was looking at the satellite image on the screen with an expression that Ferris, who was watching her more carefully than anyone else in the room, recognized as calculation. Not reaction, not intimidation. Calculation. The expression of someone already working the problem. "I can make that shot," she said. The laughter that followed was immediate and total. Marsh didn't laugh. He did something worse. He turned back to Aldrich with the expression of a man who believes he's being tested and doesn't appreciate the test. "Sir," he said with respect, "the gap is 14 inches at 1,900 meters. In valley crosswinds. That's a sub-MOA shot under conditions that would challenge the best precision shooters in the world. I know, she said from the back of the room. I've made harder ones. Marsh turned to look at her. His expression had gone past skepticism into something more personal, irritation. The irritation of a man who has spent 20 years earning his place in rooms like this and does not enjoy having that place made uncertain by someone he has no context for. Ma'am, he said, and the word was professionally polite in a way that contained no actual respect, this is a special operations planning session. The people in this room have a combined total of over 160 combat deployments. The shot you're describing is not something you volunteer for. It's something you earn the right to attempt through years of. My name is on the mission packet, she said, the one Colonel Aldrich received last night, classified above your current clearance level. You should read the portions you're authorized to see. The room reacted to that. You could feel it, a kind of collective bristling, the institutional immune response of a group of elite men being told that someone they've dismissed has access they don't. She stays, Aldrich said. She's authorized, and the way he said it closed the conversation without closing the tension. Hendricks was sitting 3 seats from the front. His jaw was set. His arms were crossed. He was thinking about the chair he'd pulled out from under her, and he was thinking it with the full confidence of a man who believed that history would prove him right about who belonged in that room and who didn't. The word moved through FOB Harmon, the way words always move through small bases. By noon, every person on the installation knew that a woman had shown up that morning, unannounced, and had claimed in front of the senior operators on the base that she could make a shot that none of them believed was possible. Money changed hands, actual cash. Lanham put $20 on. She doesn't even know how to zero the scope. 3 people took that bet. At 1400, Ferris found her in the small equipment room adjacent to the armory. She had the equipment case open on the bench, and the weapon inside it made Ferris stop in the doorway. It was a precision rifle system, unlike anything currently in the standard inventory. Custom built, clearly, with modifications that Ferris, who had been shooting at distance for 19 years, recognized as the kind of engineering that happened in programs most people didn't know existed. The barrel was longer than standard. The stock geometry was unusual. The scope was something he had never seen outside of a classified capabilities briefing 3 years ago that he had not been entirely sure was real. She looked up. She didn't seem surprised to see him there. Ferris stepped into the room. He looked at the rifle. He looked at her. Who built this, he said. A program you don't have clearance for, she said. Not unkindly, just factually. Ferris pulled up a stool and sat down without asking. He watched her work. Her hands moved with the kind of precision that comes from repetition beyond what most people can imagine. Not fast, not showy, just correct. Every movement purposeful. Every adjustment made with a specific intention that he could read in the way her fingers found positions without searching. How long have you been shooting, he said. She considered the question. Since I was 17, she said. Competitively first. Then the Army took an interest. Ferris nodded slowly. The Army, he said. Which part? She looked at him. Something passed between them in that look. An assessment. The specific kind that happens between professionals who are trying to determine how much truth the space between them can hold. The part that doesn't have a name on any org chart, she said. I was recruited into a program at 22. I've been operational for 7 years. Ferris did the math. You're 29. Yes. He looked at the rifle again. At the scope. At the modifications that spoke a technical language he only partially understood. And he thought about 1,900 meters through a 14-inch gap in valley crosswinds, and something in his professional instincts, the part that had been calibrated by 19 years and 14 deployments, shifted. What's your name? He said. Your actual name. Warrant Officer Elise Navarro, she said. Ferris nodded once. I'm Declan. I know, she said. I read your file before I came. Your adjustment at Kandahar in 2021, the temperature compensation at that altitude, was exceptional. Most shooters would have overcorrected. Ferris stared at her. That engagement is classified. I had clearance, she said. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then, despite every instinct that told him he was supposed to be the one evaluating the situation, he laughed, a single, short, genuine laugh that surprised him as much as it surprised her. At 1600, Aldrich arranged a demonstration, not at the base range, which only went to 800 meters, but at a stretch of flat ground beyond the eastern perimeter where targets could be placed at extended distances. The word had spread, and by 1545, 31 people were gathered around the makeshift firing line. Hendricks was at the front, arms crossed, jaw set. She arrived carrying the rifle case and a small bag of ammunition. She set up without hurry. Bipod, scope adjustments. She checked a small weather instrument 3 times, looking at the wind data with the focused inwardness of someone performing calculations that nobody else could follow. Targets had been set at 1,000, 1,400, and 1,700 meters. She settled behind the rifle. The crowd went quiet, not because anyone told them to, but because something in the way she positioned herself behind the weapon, some quality of absolute stillness, triggered an involuntary silence. The first shot broke the air like a crack of stone. The spotter at 1,000 meters pressed his radio. Hit, center mass. She didn't move. Second shot, third shot, 3 rounds, the spotter said. His voice had changed. Same hole, 1,000 meters. The crowd shifted, a low sound, the sound of recalculation. She moved to the 1,400-meter target. The wind had picked up. You could see it in the scrub, irregular gusts that came and went without pattern. She watched for 30 seconds. Then she fired. Hit. 3 rounds, identical grouping, 1,400 meters. In this wind, Marsh, standing near the back, unfolded his arms. It was a small movement that the people near him noticed. She shifted to 1,700 meters. The atmosphere around the firing line had changed entirely. The silence was no longer the silence of people expecting to be proven right. It was the silence of people who had stopped being certain about anything. 3 rounds, 1,700 meters. The spotter's voice came back different this time. Quieter. Sir, he said, addressing Aldrich, I need you to verify what I'm reading. Because what I'm seeing is a 3-round grouping at 1,700 meters that I would describe as, he paused, extraordinary. Ferris stepped forward. He picked up a spotting scope and looked. He stayed there for a long time. When he lowered it, his face was not the face of a man who had been wrong. It was the face of a man who was seeing something he hadn't known was possible. Hendricks was no longer standing with his arms crossed. His hands were in his pockets, and his jaw was working, and he was staring at the 1,700-meter target, with the expression of a man confronting the distance between what he had believed 4 hours ago and what was true. Lanham was very quiet. He was thinking about his $20. He was thinking about something else too, something harder to name. Aldrich stepped forward. Tomorrow night, he said. Full mission planning at 2100. He looked at her. I need your complete file authorized and on my desk by morning. She reached into the equipment case and pulled out a sealed folder, handed it to him. Aldrich looked at the classification markings on the front and something crossed his face. Something fast. Something he shut down quickly, but Ferris was close enough to see it. It was surprise. The kind of surprise that comes when the world hands you something significantly larger than what you expected. That night, the base didn't sleep well. Marsh sat at his desk, replaying the moment in the briefing room when he'd told her that the shot required years of earned qualification. He pressed his palms flat on the desk and looked at the wall and did not enjoy what he found when he examined his own assumptions. Aldrich was on a secure phone. The voice on the other end was giving him information in careful, measured sentences. Operational history, deployment record, mission outcomes. He had expected her to be experienced. He had not expected the numbers he was hearing. 14 operations across 4 countries, 14 successful outcomes, 0 mission failures, all classified at a level that prevented anyone who benefited from her work from knowing her name. How many people, Aldrich said quietly, came home because of her and don't know it? The voice gave him a number. Aldrich set the phone down carefully. At 0300, Ferris found her in the common area. She was sitting at a table with a topographic map of the target valley spread out in front of her, making small pencil marks. Wind corridors. Elevation calculations. He recognized what they were instantly because he'd been making the same marks on maps for 2 decades. He sat down across from her. You've already mapped the firing position, he said. 3 possible positions, she said. This one is the best. She touched the map. The other 2 have problems. This one has a micro-vibration issue from the rock composition at that elevation, she pointed. And this one puts the shooter in a thermal updraft channel during the hours we'd be operating. Ferris stared at the map. How do you know about the thermal channel? I felt it this afternoon, she said. The wind patterns on the east side of the perimeter have a similar signature. Ferris put his hands flat on the table, the gesture of a man steadying himself against something he didn't expect. He looked at her directly. I need to ask you something, he said. She waited. Fallujah, Ferris said carefully, 18 months ago. A platoon was pinned in a building complex. The after-action report says the flanking positions were neutralized by an unspecified asset. 4 rooftop positions cleared in under 90 seconds. Nobody in that platoon can explain how they got out alive. She said nothing. She didn't need to. That was you, Ferris said. She took a sip of her coffee. Ferris leaned back. He pressed one hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling. Then he brought it down. The men in that platoon, he said. Do they know? No, she said. Does anyone? A very small number of people, she said. That's how the program works. Ferris was quiet for a long time. Then, how many times has a room done what this room did to you? Laughed. She considered it. Enough times that I stopped counting, and you still show up. The mission doesn't change based on whether the room believes in me, she said. The people at the other end of the shot don't care. It either goes where it needs to go or it doesn't. Everything else is noise. They sat together until the sky began to lighten. When she stood to leave, Ferris said, "Get some sleep." You too, she said. And she meant it. The mission briefing at 2100 the following night was a different room. People sat forward instead of back, listening posture instead of dismissal posture. She took a position near the back. Nobody pulled her chair away. Aldrich laid out the plan. Insertion by helicopter at 0200, she would move to the ridgeline with a single support element. Establish the firing position. Wait for the assault team to move into position around the village perimeter. When Sarhan appeared in the compound courtyard, which intelligence indicated he did every morning at first light for approximately 4 minutes, she would take the shot. Through the 14-inch gap, at 1900 meters, the assault team would simultaneously move in to secure intelligence materials. Questions, Aldrich said. Marsh raised his hand. If the crosswinds exceed 40 kilometers per hour during the shot window, she answered before Aldrich could. Valley crosswinds at that altitude run in cycles, she said. 3 to 4 second intervals between gusts. I've analyzed the weather data for the past 6 days. The pattern is consistent. There will be windows. Marsh held her gaze, then he nodded. Slowly, the nod of a professional accepting a professional answer, and something in the room shifted for the last time. After the briefing, Hendrik stayed behind. He waited until the room was nearly empty. Then he stood up, and the size of him, which had seemed aggressive 2 days ago, now seemed uncomfortable. The discomfort of a man carrying something he needed to put down. Warrant Officer Navarro, he said. Using her name, her rank, she looked at him. The chair, he said, what I did, what I said. He stopped, started again, it was wrong. I want you to know I know that. She looked at him for a moment, not coldly, not warmly, directly. Okay, she said, I appreciate it. He left. He did not feel entirely better, because what he had done had been public, and what he had said had been private, and he understood that those things were not equivalent. At 0200, the helicopter lifted off. She sat with the rifle case across her knees and her eyes closed, not sleeping. Running the sequence, Marsh was across from her. He caught her eye once and gave a single nod. Operator to operator, I trust you. Let's go. They reached the ridgeline at 0340. Specialist Tyler Venn, 23, had carried half her equipment up the slope without a single question, which she had specifically requested. At the base of the final ascent, she said, "This is where I leave you." "Good luck," Venn said. "Wait at the extraction point," she said. "Don't move regardless of what you hear." 12 minutes later, her voice came over the command channel. "Steady, clear, ghost actual, position established, sight lines confirmed, Overwatch is live." In the command center at Harmon, Ferris closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them and went to work. The assault team moved into position around the village perimeter in the pre-dawn dark. 16 operators, silent, professional. Every one of them trusting their safety to a woman most of them had been laughing at 52 hours ago. At 0547, first light began touching the ridgelines. The courtyard of Sarhan's compound was still in shadow. At 0551, the compound door opened. A man stepped into the courtyard. "Ghost," Aldrich said over the net. "Confirm target." "Confirmed," she said. "Target positive. I have the lane." The gap between the two structures was 14 inches wide at 1900 meters. The crosswind was cycling at 3.2-second intervals. She had been tracking the cycle for 47 minutes. She knew it, the way she knew her own breathing. She waited for the gust to pass. The trough between cycles lasted approximately 2.6 seconds. The shot needed to break in that window, or the wind would push it into the stone wall of either structure. She breathed once. She fired. The round traveled 1900 meters through the cold valley air. It passed through a gap of 14 inches between two stone buildings, crossing that threshold with approximately 3 inches of clearance on either side. It arrived at the target faster than sound could follow. Target down, the surveillance drone operator said. No movement, confirmed. The command center at FOB Harmon was absolutely silent. Then the courtyard erupted. Guards pouring from the compound. Muzzle flashes. The assault team was already moving, but 2 positions on the compound roof had opened fire on the approach element. Ghost, Marsh called over the net. Rooftop, east side, 2 positions. I cannot advance. I see them, she said. First shot, rooftop position 1, clear. The second target moved behind partial cover. She could see 6 inches of shoulder and the barrel of a weapon. 6 inches at 1900 meters in cycling crosswind. She waited for the trough. 2.6 seconds, second shot. Rooftop position 2, clear. Marsh surged forward with 3 operators. They breached the compound, seized the intelligence materials, secured the courtyard. But a vehicle had started moving. A truck, emerging from a garage that hadn't appeared in any satellite imagery because the door had been closed during every pass. It accelerated north on the single road out of the valley. In the truck, Sarhan's second in command, carrying a hard drive that contained the entire network's communication architecture. Ghost, Aldrich said, vehicle heading north. Can you make the call? She tracked it. The road ran straight for approximately 300 meters before curving into a narrow pass. The vehicle was moving at roughly 70 kilometers per hour. Distance, 2,100 meters, moving target. Through a valley that was now fully lit by morning suns, which meant heat shimmer rising off the road's surface, which meant the optical environment between her and the target was actively distorting. She tracked the vehicle for 4 seconds, calculated the lead, waited for one final gust to clear. She fired. The vehicle went off the road. Stopped. Vehicle is stopped, the drone operator said. No movement. Target neutralized. The command center didn't breathe for 5 full seconds. Outstanding, Aldrich said. His voice was not steady. Ferris, standing beside the communications station, looked at the tactical display, showing 16 operators and a village full of civilians, all of them alive, all of them safe, because of a woman alone on a ridgeline in the early morning light, who had just done 3 things that the people in that command center would spend the rest of their careers trying to adequately describe. Who is she? The communications specialist said quietly. Ferris looked at him. She's the reason your friends are walking out of that valley, he said, and nobody is going to tell you her name. At 0630, the helicopter touched down at FOB Harmon. She climbed out, dirty, exhausted, moving with the particular heaviness of someone who has been still and cold for hours and is now remembering that muscles exist. She looked up and stopped. Standing on the landing pad were 31 people, operators, support staff, every person who had been part of the operation or witnessed its planning. Standing not because they were ordered to, standing because they had chosen to be there. Aldrich stepped forward. He raised his hand to his forehead, a salute. Not because protocol required it, because some things need to be done in front of witnesses. One by one, every person on that pad followed, 31 people saluting the woman they had laughed at. Ferris was the last to lower his hand. He held it 1 beat longer, not for ceremony. Because Declan Ferris, 19 years, 14 deployments, needed 1 extra second to let the full weight of what he had witnessed settle completely into his understanding of the world. The debrief lasted 2 hours. She spoke for 14 minutes. Precise, sequential, 0 unnecessary words. When she described the thermal distortion compensation on the vehicle shot, the meteorologist in the corner leaned forward and said quietly, I clocked that shimmer variance on the instruments. It was fluctuating by 0.4 MOA every 6 seconds. I know, she said. I felt it stabilize at the 5-second mark of the cycle. I timed the shot to break at that point. The meteorologist looked at Aldrich. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Aldrich put her name in the mission report, her real name, her contribution on record. He filed a formal recommendation for decoration. He attached 31 signed statements from every operator on the base. The report went up the chain. Parts of it were reclassified. Her name was partially redacted. The decoration was approved but classified. The same pattern that had followed her for 7 years. But Aldrich also secured something else, a training mandate, 3 new operators to be trained under her direct supervision. An acknowledged role, a record that could not be entirely erased. It's not enough, he told Ferris. No, Ferris said. It's not, but it's more than there was 3 days ago. On the morning she left, Lanham was standing at the gate. He was 21 years old. He had bet $20 against her, and spent 3 nights unable to sleep for reasons that had nothing to do with money. He held out a folded piece of paper. I wrote what I wanted to say, he told her. I think it came out better on paper. She took it, looked at him. I don't need this, she said. Not unkindly, directly. I know, he said. That's not why I wrote it. I wrote it because I was wrong, and I'm 21, and I need to understand that now while I still have time to be different. She looked at him for a long moment. Then thank you, Cody. He blinked. She'd used his first name. I read your file, she said, before I came. Lanham stood there for a moment. Then something crossed his face. Not a smile, the thing that comes before one. At 0610, she walked through the gate. Behind her, 31 people stood in the early morning light at a forward operating base in northern Syria, some watching a helicopter lift off and bank east until it disappeared. Ferris stood at the gate long after it was gone. He was thinking about Fallujah, about a platoon that came home alive and never knew why, about 14 other operations in classified folders, about what it costs a system to hide its best people and what it costs those people to be hidden. Lanham came to stand beside him. She said, I was going to be good at this, Lanham said quietly. You are, Ferris said. At the human part, Lanham said. That's what she meant. I know, Ferris said. They stood there until the light came fully over the ridgelines, and at FOB Harmon from that morning forward, no one ever again made the mistake of deciding who someone was before they had seen what that person could do. Because the deadliest person in the room is not always the loudest, or the biggest, or the one who arrives the way you expected. Sometimes she arrives in an unmarked vehicle with a black case over one shoulder and quiet eyes that have seen more than the room will ever know. And the only question that has ever mattered, the only question that will always matter, is whether you are wise enough to see her before she has to prove it to you.